Everyone knows the name Atlantis. It's a whisper of a lost golden age. A story of a city that had it all and then lost it in a single day. Plato told us about it over 2,300 years ago. He described a mighty island nation, larger than Libya and Asia combined, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a marvel of engineering, with concentric rings of land and water. Its people were noble and powerful, but they grew corrupt. And so, in a violent cataclysm of earthquakes and floods, Atlantis and its people vanished beneath the sea. But was Plato telling a true story? Was he passing down a real ancient memory? Or was he just creating a cautionary tale, a myth to teach a lesson about pride and power? Nobody knows for sure. And that uncertainty has fueled an obsession that has lasted for centuries. Explorers, scholars, mystics, and dreamers have all searched for it. They've pointed to maps, translated ancient texts, and dived to the bottom of the ocean. They found strange rock formations, sunken ruins, and tantalizing clues. But they have never found Atlantis. The search has given us dozens of theories. Some are based in serious science. Others sound like science fiction. They place Atlantis in the freezing wastes of Antarctica, the hot sands of the Sahara, and the green hills of Ireland. They imagine it as an alien outpost or a purely philosophical idea. Each theory is a different lens through which to view the mystery. Each one asks us to question what we think we know about our own history. Are we the pinnacle of civilization, or are we just the survivors of a world that was once much grander? Was there a mother culture, a global advanced society that was wiped from the earth, leaving only faint echoes in myths and legends around the world? The story of Atlantis forces us to wonder. Number 20. Was Atlantis part of a network of lost continents? The story of Atlantis is big, but for some, it's not big enough. The theory goes that Atlantis wasn't alone. It was just one piece of a global puzzle of lost lands. Two other names often come up in this conversation, Lemuria and Mu. This idea didn't come from ancient texts. It came from the 19th century, a time of spiritual exploration and a fascination with hidden histories. The main figure here is Helena Blavatsky, a co-founder of the Theosophical Society in 1875. In her massive book, The Secret Doctrine, she laid out a complex cosmic history of humanity. She wrote about root races, vast epochs of human evolution. Atlantis, she claimed, was the home of the fourth root race, a race of giants who had psychic powers but were ultimately corrupted by their own knowledge. But before the Atlanteans, there was the third root race, the Lemurians. The name Lemuria was actually coined by a scientist, Philip Sclater, in 1864. He was trying to explain why there were similar lemur fossils in both Madagascar and India, but not in Africa or the Middle East. His solution was a hypothetical land bridge or continent in the Indian Ocean. He called it Lemuria. The scientific community later explained the fossil distribution with plate tectonics, but the name and the idea of a lost continent stuck. Blavatsky and other mystics adopted Lemuria as the home of a spiritual, gentle race that existed millions of years ago. Then there's Mu. This lost continent was popularized by a writer named James Churchward, starting in the 1920s with his book, The Lost Continent of Mu. Churchward claimed he learned about Mu from ancient tablets he studied in India. According to him, Mu was a huge continent in the Pacific Ocean, the cradle of all human civilization. It was a tropical paradise home to 64 million people that was destroyed in a cataclysm around 12,000 years ago. The survivors, he said, went on to found the ancient civilizations of Egypt, India, and the Americas. In this grand theory, Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu were contemporaries, part of a worldwide network of advanced civilizations. They traded, they warred, they shared knowledge. Their destruction wasn't an isolated event, but a global catastrophe that reset human history. Believers in this idea point to similarities in myths and architecture across the world, like pyramid structures in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and Southeast Asia. They see these as evidence of a shared mother culture, a legacy from this lost network of continents. Mainstream science, of course, completely rejects this. There is no geological evidence for massive continents sinking into the Pacific or Indian Oceans in such a short time. The theories of Blavatsky and Churchward are considered pure fantasy, built on misinterpretations and fabricated stories. And yet, the idea holds a powerful appeal. It suggests a past far more epic and interconnected than we imagine. It paints a picture of a world not rising toward a peak, but recovering from a devastating fall. If these continents did exist, are there ruins sitting on the ocean floor just waiting to be found? Could advanced sonar and deep-sea submersibles finally prove Churchward and Blavatsky right? And if they were all destroyed, what kind of global event could wipe out 3 continents at once? And number 19, did the survivors of Atlantis go underground? What if Atlantis didn't just sink? What if its people escaped? And what if they didn't flee across the water but went down, deep into the earth? This brings us to the hollow earth theory. The idea that our planet is not a solid ball of rock and metal, but a hollow shell with a whole other world inside. This isn't a new idea. It has appeared in myths and legends for centuries. Many cultures have stories of underworlds, like the Greek Hades or the Norse Svartalfheim, but the modern hollow earth theory really took shape in the 18th and 19th centuries. In 1818, an American army officer named John Cleves Sims Jr. became obsessed with the idea. He declared that the Earth was hollow and habitable within, with openings at the North and South poles. He petitioned the U.S. Congress to fund an expedition to find one of the openings. He failed, but his idea captured the public imagination. Later, writers connected this concept to the Atlantis myth. The thinking is that the Atlanteans were far more advanced than us. They had technology we can't even imagine. When they saw their doom approaching, they used this technology not to build ships, but to build tunnels. They burrowed deep into the Earth's crust, creating a new home in the vast caverns below. There, they preserved their knowledge, their culture, and their society, safe from the cataclysm on the surface. Some versions of the theory claim they created an artificial sun at the center of the Earth to light their new world. This idea found a home in esoteric and New Age beliefs. One of the most famous proponents was a writer named Raymond Bernard, whose 1964 book, The Hollow Earth, became a cult classic. He argued that UFOs don't come from other planets. They come from inside our own. They are the advanced flying machines of the Atlanteans or other subterranean races who occasionally emerge to monitor us surface dwellers. The proponents of this theory point to strange phenomena as evidence. They cite anomalous radar signals, unexplained disappearances of ships and planes in places like the Bermuda Triangle, often linked to Atlantis, and myths of strange beings emerging from caves. Admiral Richard E. Byrd's alleged diary from his 1947 flight over the North Pole is often used as proof. The diary, widely considered a hoax, describes him flying into a polar opening and discovering a lush green land with mammoths and an advanced human race who warned him about humanity's use of nuclear weapons. The scientific problems with this theory are, of course, immense. Everything we know about gravity, seismology, and planetary formation tells us the Earth is solid. We can measure seismic waves as they travel through the planet's core. We know the immense pressures and temperatures would make any hollow space impossible. But for believers, that's missing the point. They argue that Atlantean science was so advanced it could overcome these challenges, creating stable environments that defy our known laws of physics. So, if a technologically superior race lives beneath our feet, why do they remain hidden? Are they waiting for us to reach a certain level of maturity before they make contact? Or do they see us as a violent primitive species to be avoided at all costs? And what kind of world could they have built down there in the dark? Number 18 was Atlantis, a highly advanced pre-Ice Age civilization. This is one of the most popular and influential modern theories about Atlantis. It moves the story out of the realm of pure myth and into the realm of alternative history. The main idea is that Plato was basically right about the timeline. Atlantis existed more than 11,000 years ago during the last ice age. But it wasn't just a single city, it was the center of a sophisticated global civilization that was wiped out by a worldwide cataclysm. The most prominent voice for this theory is the writer Graham Hancock. In his 1995 book, Fingerprints of the Gods, and in many books and documentaries since, he has pieced together a case for this lost civilization. Hancock's argument isn't based on finding a single sunken city, it's based on connecting a series of mysteries from all over the world. He points to ancient structures like the pyramids of Giza, the temples of Angkor Wat, and the megaliths of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Mainstream archaeology tells us these were built by emergent agricultural societies. Hancock argues they show a level of astronomical and engineering knowledge far too advanced for their supposed builders. For example, he points out that the Great Pyramid is aligned almost perfectly to true north, a feat that would require incredible skill. He argues that the Sphinx may be much older than Egyptologists claim, possibly thousands of years older, based on water erosion patterns on its enclosure. He connects this to ancient maps, like the Piri-Reis map of 1513, which appears to show the coast of Antarctica without its ice cap. The ice has covered Antarctica for millions of years, so how could a 16th century mapmaker know what the land looked like underneath? Hancock suggests the map was copied from much older source maps, maps made by his lost Ice Age civilization that had charted the globe. The cataclysm that destroyed this civilization, he argues, was the Younger Dryas event. This was a real period of dramatic climate change that started around 12,900 years ago. The period of gradual warming at the end of the Ice Age suddenly reversed, and the world was plunged back into near glacial conditions for over 1,000 years. Hancock, along with some scientists, supports the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. This theory suggests that a fragmented comet struck the Earth, hitting the North American ice sheet. The impact caused immense global flooding, mega tsunamis, and darkened the sky, leading to a long winter that wiped out large animal species like the woolly mammoth and this hypothetical advanced civilization. The survivors of Atlantis, in this view, were scattered across the globe. They were a shadow of their former selves, traumatized and having lost their technology. They settled among the hunter-gatherer populations of the world and tried to pass on their knowledge. These survivors became the civilizing heroes, or white gods, found in so many myths, like Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica or Viracocha in the Andes. They taught people agriculture, astronomy, and architecture, kickstarting the rise of the civilizations we know today. In this theory, Atlantis is not just one lost city, it's the lost mother culture of all human civilization. Critics argue that Hancock Cherry picks his evidence and ignores data that contradicts his theory. Archaeologists and geologists maintain that there is no physical evidence of such a global civilization. But the theory persists because it offers a grand, unified explanation for some of history's greatest mysteries. If a global civilization was wiped out, where are its cities? Could they be buried under miles of ice in Antarctica, or deep on the ocean floor, far from any current search area? If survivors did pass on their knowledge, what was the most important information they tried to save? And are we in danger of repeating their mistakes of being a technologically advanced but fragile civilization on the brink of another cataclysm? Number 17, did Atlantis just slip into another dimension? This theory takes a sharp turn away from archaeology and geology and into the world of metaphysics and theoretical physics. The idea here is that we're looking for Atlantis in all the wrong places. We're searching in three-dimensional space, under the water or under the ice. But what if Atlantis didn't sink? What if it just, a child, shifted? This theory proposes that Atlantis didn't vanish physically, but vibrationally. It moved into a different dimension or a higher plane of existence, making it invisible and inaccessible to us. This concept draws heavily from New Age spirituality and esoteric thought, which often speak of different frequencies of reality. In this view, the universe is made up of more than what we can see and touch. There are other realms, other dimensions layered on top of our own. The ancient Atlanteans, being a highly evolved civilization, were not just technologically advanced, but spiritually advanced as well. They understood the nature of consciousness and reality in ways we have forgotten. They could manipulate energy and frequency as their society reached a peak, or perhaps as they faced a cataclysm, they made a conscious choice to ascend. They raised the vibrational frequency of their entire city or island, causing it to phase out of our physical reality. The famous sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce, touched on similar ideas. In his psychic readings from the 1920s to the 1940s, he spoke extensively about Atlantis. He described it as a civilization with incredible technology powered by giant crystals. But he also spoke of a deep spiritual conflict between a benevolent group, the Sons of the Law of One, and a corrupt group, the Sons of Belial. He suggested that some of the more spiritually pure Atlanteans were able to escape the final destruction by moving to other planes of existence. Believers in this dimensional shift theory don't look for evidence in the ground. They look for it in psychic phenomena, meditation, and altered states of consciousness. They believe it's possible to connect with the energy of Atlantis or even communicate with its inhabitants through channeling or astral projection. They might point to places like the Bermuda Triangle as areas where the veil between dimensions is thin, causing strange electromagnetic anomalies and disappearances. The energy of the great Atlantean crystals, they might argue, is still active in this area, but on a different frequency, creating a portal or a distortion in space-time. This is of course a theory that lies completely outside the realm of testable science. There is no way to prove or disprove the existence of other dimensions, let alone a city that has moved into one. It relies entirely on personal belief and subjective experience. To a skeptic, it sounds like a convenient excuse for the complete lack of physical evidence for Atlantis. If you can't find it, just say it's in another dimension. But to a believer, it's the only explanation that makes sense. It explains why a civilization so vast and powerful could disappear without a trace. It didn't leave a trace in our world because it's not in our world anymore. If Atlantis exists on another vibrational plane, could we ever develop the technology or the consciousness to perceive it? Are the strange, unexplained phenomena reported around the world glimpses into this other reality? And if the Atlanteans could simply shift dimensions to escape disaster, what does that say about the ultimate nature of reality and our place in it? Number 16 was Atlantis, an alien colony. This theory blasts the Atlantis story into outer space. It suggests that the Atlanteans were not human, at least not in the way we think of ourselves. They were extraterrestrials, or perhaps they were a human-alien hybrid society founded and guided by visitors from another world. This is a central theme of what is known as ancient astronaut theory, popularized by authors like Erich von Däniken in his 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods. The core idea is that aliens have visited Earth for thousands of years, and they were responsible for the sudden leaps in human civilization. They were the gods described in ancient myths. In this scenario, Atlantis was their Earth-based headquarters. It was a colony, an outpost, or maybe a science experiment. This would explain Plato's description of Atlantis as a civilization of unbelievable advancement. The incredible engineering, the exotic metals like orichalcum, the flying machines that some interpreters read into the text, these were not the products of primitive humans. They were alien technology. The concentric rings of the city weren't just for defense. They could have been a power plant, a communications array, or a landing pad for starships. The Atlanteans' knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and genetics was not developed over centuries, it was brought to them from the stars. The story of the war between Atlantis and ancient Athens takes on a new meaning. It becomes a story of an alien colony trying to expand its influence, being fought back by a plucky, primitive human society. The eventual destruction of Atlantis also gets a new explanation. It wasn't just a natural disaster. Maybe it was the result of a terrible accident with their advanced technology, a power source that overloaded and exploded. Or perhaps it was an act of war, either a civil war among the Atlanteans, or a celestial battle with a rival alien race. The earthquakes and floods described by Plato could have been a poetic way of describing an atomic-level explosion or the use of weather control weapons. Proponents of this theory point to ancient artifacts and art from around the world that they believe depict aliens or advanced technology. They see images of figures in what look like space helmets in ancient cave paintings or carved into Mayan sarcophagi. They look at structures like the Nazca Lines in Peru, vast drawings only visible from the air, and ask if they were runways for extraterrestrial vehicles. For them, Atlantis is the missing link that ties all these anomalies together. Also, it was the hub of alien activity on ancient Earth. The scientific community dismisses this theory entirely. They argue that all the evidence is based on misinterpretation of art and a deep underestimation of the ingenuity of ancient human cultures. There is no physical proof, no crashed spaceship, no alien alloy, no piece of technology that couldn't have been made by human hands. But the theory has a powerful, almost cinematic appeal. It reframes human history as part of a much larger cosmic story. If Atlantis was an alien base, did all the inhabitants die in the cataclysm? Or did some escape back to their home planet, leaving us behind? Could their technology still be lying dormant at the bottom of the ocean, waiting to be reactivated? And if they were here once, will they ever come back? Number 15 is Atlantis, a composite of many different stories. Maybe the search for a single, real Atlantis is a wild goose chase. What if Plato wasn't retelling a single, factual history? What if he was doing what storytellers have always done, combining different elements from different stories to create something new and powerful? This is the composite myth theory. It suggests that Atlantis isn't a memory of one specific place, but an amalgamation of various historical events, locations, and legends that were known in the ancient world. Plato, a master storyteller and philosopher, could have woven these threads together to serve his philosophical purpose in the Timaeus and Critias. Think of the key elements of the Atlantis story: a powerful island civilization, a catastrophic natural disaster, a war between a naval power and a land-based one, a story of moral decay leading to divine punishment. Each of these elements has parallels in other, very real historical events and myths. The most obvious candidate for inspiration is the Minoan civilization and the eruption of the Thera volcano, which we'll discuss in more detail later. This provides the powerful island civilization destroyed by a cataclysm part of the story. But other elements might come from elsewhere, like the memory of the Trojan War, for example, was central to Greek identity. It was the story of a grand coalition of Greek states, like Plato's ancient Athens, attacking a powerful, wealthy city-state Troy. Plato could have borrowed the theme of a great defining war from this tradition. The memory of other disasters, like the real-life flooding of the Greek city of Helike in 373 BCE, which was destroyed by an earthquake, and tsunami, just a few years before Plato wrote his dialogues, could have provided a model for the sudden, watery demise of Atlantis. There might also be echoes of stories the Greeks heard from other cultures. Herodotus, the father of history, wrote about the conflict between the Persian Empire and the Greek city-states. Its real-life clash between a massive, wealthy, expansionist empire, Persia Atlantis, and a smaller, virtuous, democratic state Athens is a perfect match for the political drama in Plato's story. The idea of a land to the west, in the Atlantic, could have come from Phoenician or Carthaginian sailors' tales of distant islands and strange lands they encountered on their voyages. These stories, likely exaggerated, could have been blended into the narrative. So, in this view, Plato acted as a master chef. He took the Minoan disaster as his main ingredient. He added a pinch of the Trojan War, a dash of the Persian Wars, a sprinkle of sailors' tales, and the recent memory of the destruction of Helike. He mixed it all together in the bowl of his philosophical allegory about ideal states. The result was the story of Atlantis, a tale that felt historically plausible because it was built from the pieces of real history and myth. This explains why we can find so many places that seem to fit some of the details of the Atlantis story, but no single place that fits them all. We are finding the original ingredients, not the finished meal. If Plato did create a composite story, does that make it less important? Or does it make it even more impressive, a work of literary genius that blended history and myth so perfectly that we are still debating it today? Could we ever untangle all the different historical threads he used? And what does it say about the nature of truth and memory if the most enduring story of a lost city was never really about one city at all? Number 14, did Plato just get the numbers wrong? This is a very practical theory, and it's one that could solve some of the biggest problems with the Atlantis story. The two biggest obstacles to finding Atlantis are its size and its age. Plato, quoting the Egyptian priest who supposedly told the story to Solon, says Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years before Solon's time. Solon lived around 600 BCE, which places the sinking of Atlantis at about 9,600 BCE. This is deep in prehistoric times, long before any known civilization was capable of the kind of organized society Plato described. Plato also says the island was larger than Libya and Asia combined, which is geographically impossible in the Atlantic Ocean. But what if there was a simple translation error? The theory is that the Egyptian numbers were misunderstood. The key is the difference between Egyptian and Greek numerical systems and units of time. In Egyptian hieroglyphs, a single symbol could represent different values depending on context. It's possible that when Solon heard the story, or when Plato later wrote it down, a crucial mistake was made. The number 9,000 could have actually been 900. A simple mistake, a factor of 10 error. If the cataclysm happened 900 years before Solon, that puts the destruction of Atlantis at around 1500 BCE. This is a game changer. Suddenly, we are no longer in the Stone Age. We are in the middle of the Bronze Age, a time of great and powerful civilizations like the Egyptians, the Hittites, and, most importantly, the Minoans on Crete. This factor of 10 error could apply to the size as well. When Plato describes the size of the plain of Atlantis, he gives dimensions in stadia, a Greek unit of measurement. If these were also exaggerated by a factor of 10, the massive continent-sized island becomes a much more reasonably sized island, one that could plausibly exist in the Mediterranean. This simple correction solves the two biggest logistical problems with the story. It shifts Atlantis from a prehistoric mythological time frame into a known historical one, and it shrinks it from an impossible continent to a plausible island. This idea was seriously proposed by the Greek archaeologist Angelos Gallinopoulos in the 1960s. He argued that this translation error was the key to unlocking the whole mystery. It allowed him to connect Atlantis directly to the Minoan civilization, which was destroyed by the volcanic eruption of Thera in the mid-2nd millennium BCE. This one change makes the story feel much less like a myth and much more like a garbled history. It's easy to imagine how such an error could occur. Solon, a Greek, is hearing a story from Egyptian priests, translated from their language and records into his. Then, generations later, Plato is writing down a story that has been passed down through his family. A mistake, a misunderstanding of a symbol, is not just possible, it's likely. But is it too convenient? Are we just changing the story to fit the evidence we want it to fit? If the priests meant 900, why did they say 9,000? And if we can change the numbers, what other parts of the story can we change? Does this risk turning Plato's specific account into a vague story that could be molded to fit any number of locations? Number 13. Was Atlantis a garbled memory of the Trojan War? Plato's story is about a great war. A powerful, hubristic empire from the west attacks the eastern Mediterranean. They are stopped by a coalition of virtuous, free people led by a prehistoric Athens. This sounds familiar to anyone who knows Greek history. It sounds a lot like the foundational epics of Greek culture, the Trojan War stories, as told by Homer in the Iliad. Could the Atlantis story be a retelling of the Trojan War filtered through generations of storytelling and adapted by Plato for his own philosophical ends? Let's look at the parallels. The Trojan War, which historians place around 1200 BCE, was a conflict between a coalition of Greek kingdoms, the Achaeans, and the powerful city of Troy in what is now northwestern Turkey. Troy was described as an incredibly wealthy and well-fortified city, much like Atlantis. It controlled key trade routes and was seen as an outside power. The Greeks, like Plato's ancient Athenians, banded together to fight this powerful adversary. The war was long and brutal, a defining event for that generation. Plato could have taken this basic historical framework and repurposed it. He swaps Troy for Atlantis and the Achaean League for an idealized ancient Athens. He moves the enemy from the east to the west, placing them in the mythical Atlantic to make them more exotic and otherworldly. Why would he do this? By his time, the Trojan War was already ancient history, heavily mythologized by Homer. Plato might have wanted a new historical example to illustrate his points about politics and virtue, one that wasn't already loaded with the baggage of the Homeric poems. He could create a new enemy, Atlantis, that perfectly represented the corrupting influence of wealth and empire, and a new idealized Athens that perfectly represented his vision of a just state. The German scholar Eberhard Zanger proposed a version of this theory in his 1992 book, The Flood from Heaven. He argued that Troy was in fact Atlantis. He pointed to similarities in the descriptions of the landscapes, suggesting that Plato's account of the plains of Atlantis could match the plains around Troy. He also suggested that the Pillars of Hercules might not have originally referred to the Strait of Gibraltar, but to the Dardanelles, the strait that Troy controlled. In this version, the destruction of Atlantis wasn't a sudden sinking, but a metaphor for the complete collapse of Trojan civilization and its allies after the war, a sinking into obscurity. The problem with this theory is that it requires us to ignore many of the most specific details in Plato's account. Atlantis was an island, or at least a naval power based on an island. Troy was a city on the mainland. Atlantis was destroyed by a natural disaster of floods and earthquakes. Troy was destroyed by war, sacked, and burned by the Greeks. You have to twist Plato's story quite a bit to make it fit the story of Troy. But the core theme, the great war between a virtuous alliance and a powerful empire, is a powerful echo. Could Plato have consciously created an anti-Trojan War narrative? Did he see the story of Troy as an imperfect example and decide to create a better one for his philosophical dialogue? And if the story is a retelling, how much of it is based on the original event and how much is pure Platonic invention? Number 12 was Atlantis, the real-life sunken city of Dwarka. The story of a great city lost to the sea is not unique to Plato. One of the most powerful parallel stories comes from ancient India. It is the story of Dwarka, the legendary city of Lord Krishna. According to the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, and other sacred texts, Dwarka was a magnificent, fortified city built on an island off the coast of modern-day Gujarat. It was a planned city, built by the divine architect Vishvakarma at Krishna's request. It was described as a place of incredible wealth, with grand palaces made of gold, silver, and precious stones. It was a thriving center of culture and power. The story ends in tragedy. After Krishna's death, a great flood consumed the city. The texts say that the sea, which had parted to allow the city to be built, rose up and swallowed Dwarka whole, leaving no trace behind. The parallels to Plato's Atlantis are striking: a magnificent, powerful city, a home to semi-divine or heroic figures, a sudden and complete destruction by the sea. Could Plato have heard a version of this story? Trade and cultural contact between ancient Greece and India existed, especially after the conquest of Alexander the Great, though that was after Plato's time. Still, stories could have traveled along ancient trade routes much earlier. What makes this theory so compelling is that, unlike many other Atlantis candidates, there is real archaeological evidence of a sunken city in the exact location where Dwarka was said to be. In the 1980s, the Indian archaeologist S.R. Rao led a team from India's National Institute of Oceanography. They conducted underwater excavations off the coast of the modern-day city of Dwarka. They discovered submerged stone structures, massive walls, and artifacts that they dated to between 1700 BCE and 1500 BCE. Rao was convinced he had found the lost city of Krishna. His findings were celebrated in India as proof of the historical basis of the sacred texts. More recently, in 2001, another, even more startling discovery was announced. The National Institute of Ocean Technology, while surveying the Gulf of Khambat, formerly Cambay, about 200 miles north of Dwarka, found what appeared to be the remains of a massive ancient city about 120 feet underwater. Sonar scans revealed geometric structures stretching for miles. They dredged up artifacts including pottery, beads, and pieces of wood. One piece of wood was carbon dated to around 7,500 BCE. This would make the site thousands of years older than any known city in the world, radically rewriting our understanding of the origins of civilization. Could one of these sites be the real Atlantis, its story traveling west and being retold by Plato? The timeline of the Gulf of Khamhat site, 7,500 BCE, is much closer to Plato's 9,600 BCE than any Bronze Age site. However, the discovery is highly controversial. Many geologists argue that the structures are natural formations. The carbon dating of the wood is also questioned, as it could have come from a log that washed into the area from a river. Still, the existence of major submerged ruins off the coast of India provides a tantalizing possibility. It shows that great cities can be lost to the sea and that such events are recorded in a culture's most sacred stories. If the story of Dwarka is the original source for the Atlantis myth, how much was lost or changed in translation as it moved from India to Greece? Could the vast, organized city in the Gulf of Khambat be the source of both the Dwarka and Atlantis legends? And if a city that old existed, what does that say about our entire model of prehistoric human society? And number 11, was it in the North Sea, the lost land of Doggerland? We often think of Atlantis as being in a warm, sunny climate, like the Mediterranean or the Atlantic. But what if the real lost land was cold, northern, and is now sitting at the bottom of the North Sea? This theory points to a very real and very lost piece of land called Doggerland. This wasn't a mythical continent. It was a real landmass that connected Great Britain to mainland Europe during the last ice age. For thousands of years, as ice sheets covered much of northern Europe, sea levels were much lower. Doggerland was a vast, low-lying plain, not a sunken continent. It was likely a rich and fertile environment with hills, rivers, and marshes. It would have been a heartland for Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, a prime piece of real estate in Ice Age Europe. But as the Ice Age ended, the glaciers melted and sea levels began to rise. Starting around 18,000 BCE, the water slowly crept in. Over thousands of years, Doggerland shrank. What was once a huge plain became a large island, and then a collection of smaller islands. The final end for Doggerland may have come around 6,200 BCE with a catastrophic event known as the Storegga Slide. This was a massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway, one of the largest ever recorded. It triggered a mega tsunami that swept across the North Atlantic. This tsunami would have devastated the remaining low-lying coasts of Doggerland, wiping out the last of its inhabitants and submerging the final remnants of the land. The story of Doggerland is a real story of a land and its people being swallowed by the sea. Could this event, a genuine and traumatic memory for the people of Northern Europe, be the ultimate source of the Atlantis myth. The story could have been passed down through generations, orally, for thousands of years. As it was told and retold, the details would have changed. The Mesolithic hunting ground could have transformed into a great city. The hunter-gatherers could have become a mighty civilization. By the time the story reached the ancient Greeks, thousands of years later and thousands of miles away, it would have been transformed into the legend of Atlantis. The evidence for Doggerland is undeniable. Fishermen trawling the North Sea have been pulling up the bones of mammoths, woolly rhinos, and other Ice Age animals for decades. They've also found prehistoric human tools and even a human skull. Scientists have used seismic survey data from oil and gas exploration to map the ancient landscape beneath the waves, revealing its lost rivers, lakes, and coastlines. This is a real proven submerged world. While it doesn't match Plato's description of a technologically advanced Bronze Age city, it does match the core concept of a homeland lost beneath the waves in a catastrophic event. The timeline of its final submergence, around 6,200 BCE, is also closer to Plato's 9,600 BCE than the Bronze Age collapse. If the Doggerland memory is the seed of the Atlantis myth, it shows how long a story can survive in human culture. Can a folk memory really last for 6,000 years, passed down from the Stone Age to the Iron Age? What other ancient memories might be hiding in our oldest myths and legends? And as our own sea levels rise, is the story of Doggerland not just a myth, but a warning? Number 10 was Atlantis in the Americas. Plato said Atlantis was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean. If you sail west from the Strait of Gibraltar, where do you end up? The Americas. This has led many to believe that the Atlantis story is actually a fragmented memory of the American continents. This theory has taken many forms over the years, some early European explorers and writers, encountering the massive and complex civilizations of the Aztecs and Incas, wondered if these could be the remnants of Atlantis. How else could such societies have arisen in isolation? One of the most influential proponents of an American Atlantis was the 19th century writer and politician Ignatius Donnelly. His 1882 book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, is arguably the single most important book in the history of the search for Atlantis. It reignited modern interest in the topic and laid the groundwork for many of the theories that followed. Donnelly argued that Plato's account was literal fact. He believed Atlantis was a real continent in the Atlantic that was the source of all major ancient civilizations. He pointed to things like pyramid building on both sides of the Atlantic, Egypt and Mesoamerica, and flood myths and cultures all over the world as evidence of a common Atlantean origin. For Donnelly, the civilizations of the Americas were founded by refugees from the sinking continent. A more modern and specific version of this theory focuses on the Caribbean, particularly the area around the Bahamas. This is tied to the predictions of the American psychic Edgar Cayce. Cayce gave hundreds of readings about Atlantis, describing it in great detail. He claimed that Atlantis was a huge continent stretching from the Sargasso Sea to the Azores. He predicted that parts of Atlantis would rise again from the sea in 1968 or 1969, specifically in the area of Bimini. In 1968, a discovery was made that seemed to confirm his prediction. Divers off the coast of Bimini found a half-mile-long formation of large, flat, rectangular limestone blocks arranged in a neat line. It looked like a massive wall or road. It was named the Bimini Road. For many, this was it. This was the physical proof of a lost civilization in the location Cayce had predicted. The discovery created a media frenzy and drew believers from all over the world. And geologists, however, were quick to offer a natural explanation. They identified the formation as beach rock, a type of sedimentary rock that naturally fractures into straight lines and blocky shapes. Despite the scientific consensus that the Bimini Road is a natural formation, it remains a key piece of evidence for those who believe Atlantis was in the Caribbean. They argue it's just the tip of the iceberg, the highest point of a much larger sunken complex. The idea of a land bridge or a sunken continent in the Atlantic that connected the Old World and the New World is not supported by geology. Air plate tectonics shows that the continents are drifting apart, not that a continent has sunk between them. But the cultural parallels and the tantalizing, ambiguous nature of formations like the Bimini Road keep the American Atlantis theory alive. If ancient civilizations in the Americas were influenced by Atlantean survivors, where is the definitive evidence? Why is there no trace of Old World languages, technologies, or domesticated animals in the pre-Columbian Americas? And could the Bimini Road be both natural and man-made, a natural formation that was enhanced or used by an ancient people. Number 9 was Atlantis, a city in Spain. Plato gives a very specific geographical clue. He says Atlantis was situated in front of the Pillars of Hercules. For the ancient Greeks, the Pillars of Hercules was the Strait of Gibraltar, the gateway between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. This points directly to southern Spain and Morocco. This has led many researchers to look for Atlantis right there, in plain sight. One of the most promising candidates in this region is the legendary ancient city kingdom of Tartessos. Tartessos was a real civilization that flourished in what is now southern Spain from roughly 1200 BCE to 500 BCE. The Greeks wrote about it as a fabulously wealthy city, a hub for metal trading, particularly tin, silver, and gold. It was located near the mouth of the Guadalquivir River. Then, around 500 BCE, Tartessos mysteriously vanished from the historical record. No one is sure why. It could have been destroyed by the Carthaginians, or it could have been the victim of a natural disaster like a tsunami. The description of Tartessos as a rich, advanced civilization with access to the Atlantic, which met a sudden end, makes it a compelling candidate for the historical basis of Atlantis. In recent years, the search has focused on a specific area in Spain, the Donana National Park. This is a huge, swampy marshland near the mouth of the Guadalquivir River. The theory is that the ancient city of Tartessos, the real Atlantis, is buried under the mudflats of the park. In 2011, this theory gained significant media attention with a National Geographic documentary called Finding Atlantis. The documentary followed a team led by Professor Richard Freund from the University of Hartford. Using a combination of satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and electrical resistivity tomography, they identified the possible site of a large, submerged city buried in the marshes. They also found a series of memorial cities built nearby by the survivors, which seemed to model the concentric ring design of the main city. Freund's team argued that a massive tsunami, one of the largest to hit the Atlantic coast of Europe, wiped out the city around 2,500 years ago, covering it in mud and silt. The timeline around 500 BCE is much later than Plato's, but it's close enough that a memory of the event could have been fresh when Plato was writing. The location, just beyond the Pillars of Hercules, is a perfect match. The description of a wealthy metal trading hub fits Tartessos. The evidence of a massive tsunami in the region is geologically supported. However, the theory has been heavily criticized by Spanish archaeologists. They argue that Freund's team misinterpreted their data and that there is no conclusive evidence of a major city at the site they identified. They suggest the memorial cities are more likely Roman or from other known periods. Well, the debate is ongoing. But the possibility that a great, powerful city, a city that was the model for Atlantis, lies buried under a Spanish swamp is a powerful one. It would mean that Atlantis has been waiting for us right where Plato said it would be. Could the mudflats of Donana Park really be hiding a lost Bronze Age metropolis? If we were to excavate the site, would we find evidence of concentric canals and a temple to Poseidon? And if Tartessos was Atlantis, why did Plato change its name and push its history back by thousands of years? Number 8. Could the Eye of the Sahara be Atlantis? Sometimes a picture is all it takes to start a theory. In this case, the picture is a stunning satellite image of a geological formation in Mauritania called the Richat structure. It's also known as the Eye of the Sahara. It's a massive, deeply eroded dome about 25 miles in diameter, consisting of a series of spectacular concentric rings. When you look at it from space, it looks remarkably like Plato's description of the capital city of Atlantis. Then Plato wrote that the city was made of concentric rings of land and water, 3 of water and 2 of land, created by the god Poseidon. The Richat structure has a central island and a series of surrounding rings. This theory has exploded in popularity in recent years, largely thanks to the internet and platforms like YouTube. The visual similarity is the starting point. Proponents then dig into Plato's text, looking for other correlations. Plato describes mountains to the north of the city. The Richat structure has mountains to its north. And Plato mentions that the city was open to the sea to the south. The structure's southern side is lower and opens out onto a plain that once may have been connected to the sea. Geologists believe that this part of the Sahara was once much wetter and greener than it is today. The ancient Tassili Naajer rock art in nearby Algeria depicts a time when elephants, giraffes, and other animals roamed the area, which lines up with Plato's description of elephants on Atlantis. Plato also gives very specific measurements for the concentric rings of his city. The proponents of the rechat theory have argued that these measurements, when converted from Greek stadia to modern units, are a surprisingly close match for the diameters of the rings of the rechat structure. The central island of Atlantis was said to be 5 stadia in diameter. The central island of the Rehat structure is a similar size. The theory suggests that the canals of water described by Plato were not filled with water when it was a thriving city, but were eroded over time to look like that now. The main problem with this theory, and it's a huge one, is geology. The scientific consensus is that the Rechat structure is a completely natural geological formation, an uplifted dome that has eroded over millions of years. It is not an artificial man-made city. Another major issue is the lack of any archaeological evidence. Despite its prominence, there has been no discovery of a major advanced civilization at the site. There are some simple Stone Age artifacts, but nothing that suggests a Bronze Age metropolis. The timeline is also a problem. The structure is millions of years old, and the idea of it being a city in 9,600 BCE is pure speculation. Despite the lack of scientific support, the Eye of the Sahara theory remains incredibly popular online. The visual evidence is so striking, so seemingly perfect, that many find it hard to believe it's just a coincidence. For them, it is the scar of Atlantis hiding in plain sight. Is the stunning resemblance just a random coincidence of geology? Or could an ancient city have been built on a pre-existing natural formation, enhancing its concentric rings? If it was Atlantis, could the lack of archaeological evidence be because the ruins were completely pulverized and eroded by the catastrophe that destroyed it? Number 7 was Atlantis, a fictional warning from Plato. This is the least exciting theory. It's also the one that most professional historians, archaeologists, and classicists believe is true. The theory is that Atlantis never existed. It was not a real place. It was a complete invention, a fictional creation by Plato for a specific philosophical purpose. In this view, searching for Atlantis is like searching for the real-life location of Hogwarts or the Shire. You'll never find it because it only ever existed in a book. To understand this theory, you have to understand Plato's goal in his dialogues, the Timaeus and Critias. He wasn't trying to write a history textbook. He was exploring deep questions about politics, justice, and the ideal society. His earlier and more famous dialogue, The Republic, laid out his vision of a perfect state ruled by philosopher kings. The Atlantis story, told in the later dialogues, was meant to be a practical illustration of these ideas. It was a thought experiment brought to life. Plato creates 2 opposing societies. On one side, he has an ancient, idealized Athens, a small, virtuous, and perfectly ordered state, just like the one he described in The Republic. On the other side, he has Atlantis. Atlantis is everything Athens is not. It is huge, wealthy, technologically advanced, and militarily powerful. It is an empire with ambitions to conquer the world. Initially, the Atlanteans are noble, but over time, their wealth and power corrupt them. They become arrogant, greedy, and immoral. The story of the war is the ultimate test. The small state of Athens is able to defeat the massive, corrupt empire of Atlantis because its social order is superior. The final destruction of Atlantis by the gods is a divine judgment. It's a cautionary tale, a powerful myth about the dangers of hubris, imperialism, and materialism. The message is clear: moral and spiritual strength is more important than wealth and military might. Just society will triumph, while a corrupt one is doomed to destroy itself. There is strong evidence to support this view. First, Plato is the only ancient source for the story of Atlantis. No other Greek writer, poet, or historian before him ever mentions it. Not Herodotus, not Thucydides, nobody. It seems to appear out of nowhere in Plato's dialogues. If it were a real, well-known historical tradition passed down from Egypt, you would expect to find other references to it. Second, the story fits so perfectly with Plato's philosophical arguments that it seems tailor-made. The details of ancient Athens in the story don't match what archaeology tells us about prehistoric Athens, but they do match Plato's own political theories. It seems he invented an ideal past for his own city to make his point. For mainstream scholars, the case is closed. Atlantis is a myth, a brilliant and influential one, but a myth nonetheless. The search for a physical Atlantis is based on a fundamental misreading of Plato's intent. But if it's just a story, why did Plato present it as a true history passed down from so long? Was he just using a clever literary device to make his story more believable? Could he have been doing both and using a real, half-remembered historical event as, the foundation for his philosophical fable? And does it even matter if it was real, if the power of its message has resonated for over 2 millennia? Number 6, was it Ireland? When we think of Atlantis, we usually picture a Mediterranean or Atlantic setting. But what if we should be looking further north to the Emerald Isle? This theory, proposed by Dr. Ulf Erlingsson, a Swedish geographer, argues that the Republic of Ireland is a perfect match for Plato's description of the island of Atlantis. In his 2004 book, Atlantis from a Geographer's Perspective, Erlingsson makes his case not by looking for sunken ruins, but by comparing Plato's geographical description of the island and its central plain with the real-life geography of Ireland. He starts with the size. Plato describes the island of Atlantis as being about 300 miles long and 200 miles wide. Ireland is almost exactly this size. Plato describes a large oblong plain in the center of the island, which was open to the sea at one end but surrounded by mountains on the other 3 sides. This, Erlingsson argues, is a perfect description of Ireland's central lowlands, a large plain that is surrounded by coastal mountains but opens to the sea in the east, near Dublin. Plato's measurements for this plain, he claims, are also a very close match for the size of the Irish central plain. The theory goes on to connect other details. The concentric rings of the capital city are reinterpreted not as a city, but as a feature of the landscape. While Erlingsson points to megalithic monuments in Ireland, like Newgrange and Knowth, as evidence of a highly advanced Neolithic civilization. These sites, which are older than the pyramids, show a sophisticated knowledge of engineering and astronomy. This ancient Irish civilization, he proposes, was the real Atlantis. The story of its sinking wasn't literal. He suggests it refers to a catastrophic event that did happen in Ireland, the submergence of a coastal plain known as the Porcupine Bank after the last ice age, possibly combined with a tsunami. The memory of this event, combined with the grandeur of the megalithic culture, formed the basis of the legend that eventually reached Plato. He also connects the story to Irish mythology, which is full of tales of magical islands and advanced ancient races like the Tuatha De Danann. He argues that the name Atlantis itself could be a Greek translation of an old Celtic phrase meaning white-fronted island, a possible reference to the cliffs of Moher. This theory is clever because it doesn't require a whole continent to sink. It just requires a rereading of Plato's text through a geographer's lens, identifying a real place that matches the description. The main criticisms are that it requires a lot of interpretation. It assumes the sinking was metaphorical and that the story of a great war and empire was added later. And while the geography is an interesting match, there's no direct historical or archaeological link between Neolithic Ireland and Plato's Greece. There's no proof that a story from 3000 BCE Ireland could have survived and traveled all the way to 4th century BCE Athens. Could the incredible megalithic structures of Ireland be the work of the Atlanteans? Is it possible that Irish myths of sunken lands are not myths at all, but a genuine folk memory of a post-glacial flood? And if Ireland is Atlantis, are there other major historical mysteries that could be solved simply by looking at a map in a new way? Number 5, did a massive flood in the Black Sea create the legend? The story of a great flood that wipes out civilization is one of humanity's oldest and most universal myths. We find it in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of Noah's Ark in the Bible, and in legends from cultures all over the world. What if the Atlantis story is another version of this great flood myth, based on a real and truly catastrophic geological event? In the 1990s, 2 Columbia University geologists, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, proposed a stunning theory. They argued that they had found the basis for the Noah's Ark story, a massive sudden flooding of the Black Sea. Their theory, detailed in their 1998 book Noah's Flood, goes like this. During the last ice age, the Black Sea was not a saltwater sea. It was a smaller freshwater lake, completely cut off from the Mediterranean. Its surface was hundreds of feet lower than the world's oceans. As the ice age ended and glaciers melted, sea levels in the Mediterranean rose. Eventually, around 5600 BCE, the rising waters of the Mediterranean breached the natural dam at the Bosporus, the strait that now connects the two seas. When the dam broke, it wasn't a gentle trickle, it was a cataclysm. Salt water began pouring into the Black Sea basin with the force of 200 Niagara Falls. The water level in the Black Sea would have risen by 6 inches a day, A torrent of water advanced across the plains, swallowing up a mile of coastline every day. Any settlements along the shores of the freshwater lake would have been obliterated. People would have had to flee for their lives as the sea relentlessly chased them. It would have been an apocalyptic event, an unforgettable trauma for the people who lived there. Ryan and Pittman argue that this single dramatic event was so powerful that it was seared into the collective memory of the survivors. As they scattered into Europe and the Middle East, they took the story of the Great Flood with them. Over generations, this story evolved into the various flood myths we know today. Could the Atlantis story be one of these myths? The people who lived on the shores of the Black Sea Lake were likely advanced Neolithic farmers, part of the culture that was just beginning to transform human society. The sudden loss of their world, their fertile homeland, in a watery cataclysm fits the core of the Atlantis story. The details are the concentric rings. The war with Athens could have been added much later by Plato. The original seed of the story was the traumatic memory of the Black Sea flood. The evidence for the flood is still debated by geologists and archaeologists, but Ryan and Pittman have presented compelling data, including sediment cores and sonar mapping of the old shoreline deep beneath the Black Sea. They found evidence of the transition from a freshwater to a saltwater environment and discovered ancient mollusks that died in the initial surge of saltwater. If this theory is correct, it doesn't point to a single city called Atlantis. It points to a lost world, a drowned cradle of civilization at the bottom of the Black Sea. If a whole civilization was drowned in the Black Sea, what archaeological treasures are still waiting to be discovered under the mud and silt? Could a deep-sea submersible find the remains of a 7,500-year-old Neolithic village? And how many of our other ancient myths are actually based on real catastrophic natural disasters? Number 4 was Atlantis in Antarctica. This theory sounds like pure fantasy at first. How could a great civilization exist on the coldest, most inhospitable continent on Earth? The answer, according to this theory, is that Antarctica wasn't always at the South Pole. The key to this idea is a controversial geological theory called Earth crustal displacement, most famously championed by an American professor named Charles Hapgood in his 1958 book Earth's Shifting Crust. The foreword to Hapgood's book was written by none other than Albert Einstein, which gave the theory a veneer of credibility, although Einstein did not fully endorse it. Hapgood's theory proposed that the entire lithosphere, the rigid outer crust of the Earth, can sometimes shift in one piece over the softer, molten asthenosphere below, like the skin of an orange slipping over the fruit. Such a shift, he argued, could be triggered by the immense weight of the polar ice caps. The result would be that large landmasses could move into and out of polar regions in a relatively short amount of time. According to Hapgood, the landmass of Antarctica was not at the South Pole 12,000 years ago. It was further north, in a more temperate climate. It was a green and fertile continent, capable of supporting a large population and a high civilization. This, he claimed, was Atlantis. Then, around 9,600 BCE, the exact date Plato gives a crustal displacement occurred. The entire crust shifted, dragging the continent of Antarctica southward into its current position at the South Pole. The continent's climate changed drastically and rapidly. The once temperate land was quickly covered by a massive ice sheet, which grew to be miles thick. The great cities of Atlantis, its temples, and all evidence of its civilization were buried under the ice, flash frozen, and preserved. This theory was later adopted and expanded by writers like Rond and Rose Flamath in their book When the Sky Fell, and it connects neatly with Graham Hancock's idea of a lost ice age civilization. They use the same evidence, such as the Piri Reis map, which they claim accurately depicts the coast of Antarctica before it was covered in ice. How could anyone have mapped it unless they saw it when it was ice-free? The only explanation, they argue, is that the source maps came from this advanced Antarctic civilization. Mainstream geology completely rejects the theory of rapid Earth crustal displacement. The evidence for plate tectonics shows that continents move, but they do so incredibly slowly, at a rate of inches per year, not thousands of miles in a sudden shift. The scientific consensus is that Antarctica has been at or near the South Pole and covered in ice for millions of years. But for proponents of the theory, Antarctica is the perfect hiding place for Atlantis. It's a vast, unexplored continent. If a lost civilization is buried under 2 miles of ice, it's no wonder we haven't found it. Yeah, it would be the greatest archaeological discovery in human history, hidden in the last place anyone would think to look. Could the ancient maps really be evidence of an ice-free Antarctica? With modern ice-penetrating radar, could we survey the entire continent and find the shapes of buried cities beneath the ice? And if a crustal shift is possible, could it happen again? Number 3 was Atlantis, the island of Malta. In the central Mediterranean, between Sicily and the coast of North Africa, lies the small island nation of Malta. At first glance, it might not seem like a candidate for a superpower that challenged Athens. But Malta has a secret. It is home to some of the oldest freestanding structures on Earth, the megalithic temples of Malta. Built between 3600 BCE and 2500 BCE, these massive limestone temples like Hagar Kim and Mnadra are older than Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids of Giza. They are a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a testament to a sophisticated and organized prehistoric culture. The theory that Malta is connected to Atlantis centers on these mysterious temples. Who were the people who built them, and why did their civilization suddenly collapse and disappear around 2500 BCE? The proponents suggest this was the Atlantean culture of the central Mediterranean. They point to the complexity of the temples, their astronomical alignments, and the artistic skill of the artifacts found within them as evidence of a highly advanced society. Some researchers also point to strange, parallel tracks cut deep into the limestone all over the island. These cart ruts are a mystery. No one knows who made them, when, or why. Some speculate they are the remnants of an ancient industrial transport system. The sinking part of the story comes from the geology of the region. During the last ice age, when sea levels were lower, Malta was not an island. It was the highest point of a land bridge that connected Sicily and thus Europe to North Africa. As the ice melted and the sea rose, this land bridge was submerged, leaving only the peaks of Malta and its sister island Gozo above the waves. The submergence of this vast, fertile land could be the historical event behind the myth. Some divers and researchers claim to have found evidence of submerged megalithic structures off the coast of Malta, suggesting the temple-building culture was much more extensive than what we see on land today. The idea is that the main centers of this civilization are now underwater. The Atlantis that Plato described was not the small island of Malta we see today, but the much larger landmass that existed before the sea levels rose. The final catastrophe could have been a major earthquake or tsunami, common in the Mediterranean, that wiped out the last remnants of this once great civilization. The main problem is the timeline. The Maltese temple culture flourished thousands of years after Plato's date of 9600 BCE, and it collapsed over 2,000 years before Plato was born. You have to assume Plato's dates are completely wrong. Also, while the temple culture was impressive, there's no evidence that it was a huge militaristic empire that waged war on Athens. It seems to have been a peaceful, ritual-focused society. Still, the existence of such an ancient and mysterious civilization, which met a sudden end and is surrounded by a now submerged landscape, makes Malta a fascinating possibility. What was the true purpose of the Maltese temples? Are there more temples, or even entire settlements waiting to be discovered on the seabed around the island? And could the mysterious cart ruts be the last trace of a lost Atlantean technology? Number 2, was it in the Atlantic, just like Plato said? Why overcomplicate things? Plato gave us a location in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Maybe we should just take him at his word? This is the oldest and most straightforward theory. It proposes that there really was a large island or a small continent in the Atlantic that sank beneath the waves. For centuries, this was the default assumption. Old maps from the 16th and 17th centuries often included mythical islands in the Atlantic, sometimes labeled Atlantis. The search for this lost land has focused on various parts of the ocean. One key area of interest has always been the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. This is a massive underwater mountain range that runs down the center of the Atlantic Ocean. It's a volcanically active area where the tectonic plates are pulling apart. Some have theorized that a large island could have existed along this ridge and then collapsed due to violent volcanic and seismic activity. The Azores, a group of volcanic islands that sit directly on the ridge, are considered by some to be the last surviving mountain peaks of the lost continent of Atlantis. They point to the steepness of the underwater slopes around the islands as evidence of a rapid sinking. Ignatius Donnelly, in his hugely influential 1882 book, was the ultimate champion of this literal interpretation. He used ocean depth soundings, which were a new technology at the time, to argue that the varying depths of the Atlantic floor were evidence of a sunken continent. He believed this Atlantic continent was the bridge that explained cultural similarities between the Old World and the New. The biggest scientific obstacle to this theory is, again, plate tectonics. The theory of continental drift, which is now the bedrock of modern geology, shows that the continents are moving apart. There is no known geological mechanism that would allow a massive continent-sized landmass made of continental crust to simply sink into the much denser oceanic crust of the ocean floor. Geologists are firm continents don't sink. Islands can, especially volcanic islands, but nothing on the scale of what Plato described. Despite the geological impossibility, the search for clues in the Atlantic continues. People point to strange underwater sonar readings or anomalous rock formations as potential evidence. The legend is so powerful that it encourages people to keep looking, even when science says there's nothing to find. The appeal of the literal interpretation is its simplicity. It doesn't require us to reinterpret Plato's words, change his dates, or look for metaphors. It requires us only to believe that he meant what he said, and that the greatest discovery in history is still waiting for us in the cold, dark depths of the Atlantic. If a large island did sink in the Atlantic, could it have been a purely volcanic island, which can sink, rather than a full continent? Are there structures on the seabed around the Azores that have been mistaken for natural formations? And with our ever-improving deep-sea exploration technology, is it only a matter of time before we find something that forces science to reconsider the impossible? Number 1 was Atlantis, the Minoan civilization on Thera. We've arrived at the number 1 theory. This is the most widely accepted candidate for a real Atlantis among credible archaeologists and historians who are open to the idea. It is the Minoan hypothesis. This theory suggests that the story of Atlantis is a garbled, exaggerated memory of one of the most dramatic events in the ancient world, the volcanic destruction of the island of Thera, now called Santorini, around 1600 BCE. Here's how the pieces fit together. The Minoan civilization, centered on the island of Crete, was the first great European civilization. They were a sophisticated Bronze Age culture, a major naval and trading power that dominated the Aegean Sea. They built magnificent palaces like the one at Knossos and created beautiful art. They were, by all accounts, a powerful and advanced society. One of their most important outposts was on the island of Thera, a small island about 70 miles north of Crete. On Thera, there was a thriving Minoan port city now being excavated at a site called Akrotiri. This city was remarkably well preserved, a Bronze Age Pompeii buried in a thick layer of volcanic ash. Around 1600 BCE, the volcano at the center of Thera erupted. This was not just any eruption. It was one of the largest volcanic explosions in human history, many times more powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883. The eruption blew the center of the island apart, creating the massive crescent-shaped caldera that we see today. It sent a plume of ash miles into the sky, blotting out the sun, and it triggered colossal tsunamis that radiated across the Aegean. The Minoan city of Akrotiri was instantly buried. The tsunamis would have slammed into the northern coast of Crete, wiping out its ports, its ships, and its coastal towns. The ashfall would have poisoned agricultural land across the region. The Minoan civilization never fully recovered. Within a few generations, their power was broken, and they were eventually conquered by the Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland. Now, compare this real historical event to Plato's story. We have a powerful, advanced island civilization, the Minoans. We have a great city that vanished in a single day, Akrotiri on Thera. We have a destruction by earthquakes and floods, a volcanic eruption, and tsunamis. The timeline is the key. If we apply the factor of 10 era we discussed earlier, changing Plato's 9,000 years before Solon to 900, the date of the cataclysm moves from 9,600 BCE to around 1500 BCE, a near-perfect match for the eruption of Thera. The story could have been preserved in Egypt, a major trading partner of the Minoans. The Egyptians would have certainly noted the sudden collapse of their powerful neighbor. The story could have been passed down in their temple records for 1,000 years, until it was told to the Greek lawmaker Solon. He brought it back to Greece, where it was passed down through his family to Plato. Over that time, the details were exaggerated. The island of Thera became the continent of Atlantis. The Minoan navy became a world-conquering empire. the conflict with the mainland Mycenaeans became a heroic war with an idealized ancient Athens. This theory, first proposed in detail by the Greek archaeologist Spyridon Marinatos, who began the excavations at Akrotiri, provides a plausible historical seed for Plato's myth. It doesn't require us to believe in sunken continents or alien astronauts. It just requires us to believe in the power of memory and its ability to transform a real-life tragedy into a timeless legend. But does this theory answer all the questions? What about the concentric rings? Akrotiri was a port city, not a circular one. And what about the war with Athens? The Minoans were not at war with Athens at the time of the eruption. Is the Minoan hypothesis the final answer to the mystery, or is it just the most convenient one we've found so far? What other secrets are still buried under the volcanic ash on Santorini? And could the Minoans have had other outposts, even further west, that were also lost to the sea? The search continues.